Throughout history, certain passages of the Bible have sparked endless curiosity, debate, and even mystery. One such passage is found in the book of Genesis, where an enigmatic group of beings known as the Nephilim is introduced. Who were they? Were they divine beings, fallen angels, or simply powerful men? Were they giants in a physical sense, or does the word giant carry a deeper, more symbolic meaning? These are the questions that have fascinated scholars, theologians, and believers for centuries. The Nephilim appear in a brief but puzzling portion of the Old Testament, specifically in Genesis 6 verse 1-4. The text describes a time before the Great Flood, a period of increasing corruption on earth. It speaks of the sons of God who came down to the daughters of men and bore children, who became the mighty men of old, the men of renown. But who were these sons of God? And why does this passage seem to suggest that their union with human women resulted in something extraordinary? To understand the significance of the Nephilim, we must first recognize the context in which they are mentioned. The world before the flood was described as increasingly wicked, filled with violence and moral decay. Genesis 6 verse 5 states, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." This verse sets the stage for divine intervention, leading to the great flood. But what role did the Nephilim play in this growing corruption? Were they simply a symptom of mankind's sinful nature, or were they a more direct cause of God's decision to cleanse the world? Theories about the Nephilim's true nature vary widely. Some interpretations suggest that they were the offspring of fallen angels and human women, a hybrid race that was never meant to exist. Others believe that the phrase, "sons of God," refers to the descendants of Seth, the righteous son of Adam, who intermarried with the daughters of Cain, leading to moral and spiritual downfall. A third perspective argues that the Nephilim were not supernatural at all, but rather a class of powerful rulers and warriors who dominated the ancient world. Regardless of which interpretation one adopts, the fact remains that the Nephilim occupy a unique place in biblical history. They are not described as ordinary men, but as beings of great strength and renown. Numbers 13 verse 33, where the spies sent by Moses report, seeing the descendants of the Nephilim in Canaan, states, "And there we saw the giants, the sons of Enoch, which come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight." This description suggests an overwhelming physical presence, one that terrified even the Israelites. But if the Nephilim were wiped out by the flood, how could they appear again later in biblical history? This question has led to much speculation about the survival of the Nephilim and their connection to later giant clans such as the Anakim and the Rephaim. Were these groups descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim, or were they simply large and powerful warriors who inherited their legacy? The Bible does not provide a direct answer, leaving room for various interpretations. Beyond the biblical texts, ancient Jewish and Christian writings, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, expand on the story of the Nephilim. These texts describe them as the offspring of fallen angels, detailing their immense size, their insatiable hunger, and their eventual destruction by divine judgment. While these books are not considered part of the biblical canon, they provide insight into how early believers understood the Nephilim and their role in biblical history. Another intriguing aspect of the Nephilim story is its possible connection to eschatology, the study of the end times. When Jesus spoke about the days of Noah in Matthew 24 verse 37, he said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the coming of the Son of Man." Some scholars believe that this statement hints at a return of Nephilim like beings in the last days, suggesting that whatever corruption existed before the flood could reappear before the final judgment. The fascination with the Nephilim has not faded over time. Even today, discussions about their nature, their role in biblical history, and their possible return continue to capture the imagination of many. Are the Nephilim merely an ancient mystery, or do they hold a deeper significance for understanding both biblical history and future prophecy? As we delve deeper into the story of the Nephilim, we will explore their origins, their role in the pre-flood world, their possible survival, and the theological implications of their existence. From the accounts of Genesis to the writings found in ancient texts, from their presence among the Canaanite giants to their potential relevance in end-times prophecy, the Nephilim remain one of the most enigmatic figures in biblical history. Before we dive deeper, I'd like to take a moment to ask for your support. If you're enjoying this content and want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, and giving this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories and insights with more people. Thank you. And now, let's continue. The mystery of the Nephilim. Who were they? The Nephilim are first mentioned in Genesis 6 verse 1-4, a passage that has puzzled readers for generations. The text states, "When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, 'My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." This passage raises several questions that have led to various interpretations throughout history. Who were the sons of God? Were they divine beings, fallen angels, or simply human men? What made the Nephilim different from ordinary people? And why does this passage imply that their presence contributed to the corruption of the world before the Great Flood? One of the most widely debated aspects of this passage is the identity of the sons of God. This term appears in other parts of the Old Testament, most notably in the book of Job, where it is used to refer to angelic beings. In Job 1 verse 6, we read, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." This has led many scholars to believe that the sons of God in Genesis 6 refer to angels, specifically fallen angels who took human wives. According to this view, their union with human women produced the Nephilim, who are not ordinary humans, but a hybrid race, part human, part supernatural. This interpretation is known as the angelic view and has been supported by various ancient Jewish texts, including the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish writing that expands on biblical themes, provides a detailed account of how fallen angels, known as the Watchers, descended to earth and took human wives. These angels, led by a figure named Semjaza, taught humanity forbidden knowledge and fathered giants who were violent and destructive. This aligns with Genesis 6 verse 5, which describes the wickedness that spread across the earth before the flood. The Book of Enoch states that these fallen angels were eventually punished by God, bound in chains, until the final judgment, a theme echoed in the New Testament in Jude 1 verse 6, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." However, not everyone agrees with the angelic interpretation. Another perspective, known as the Sethite view, argues that the sons of God were not angels, but the descendants of Seth, the righteous son of Adam. According to this view, the daughters of men were the descendants of Cain, who had turned away from God. The mixing of these two groups, Seth's line and Cain's line, led to a decline in moral and spiritual purity. Supporters of this view believe that the Nephilim were not supernatural beings, but rather powerful and wicked rulers who dominated the ancient world. A third interpretation, sometimes called the royal view, suggests that the sons of God were kings or nobles who claimed divine status and took multiple wives in a display of power. In the ancient world, rulers often considered themselves to be representatives of the gods or even semi-divine beings. If this interpretation is correct, the Nephilim would have been mighty warriors or tyrannical leaders rather than literal giants. Despite these differing interpretations, one thing remains clear. The presence of the Nephilim coincided with a time of great corruption on the earth. Whether they were fallen angels' offspring, powerful rulers, or simply symbols of widespread wickedness, their existence is closely tied to the events leading up to the Great Flood. Another point of intrigue in Genesis 6 verse 4 is the phrase, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days," and also afterward. This suggests that the Nephilim were not only present before the flood, but may have reappeared later. This raises a significant question. If the Nephilim were wiped out by the flood, how do we later see references to giants in the Bible, such as the Anakim, Rephaim, and Goliath? Some scholars believe that fallen angels may have repeated their actions after the flood, while others suggest that the Nephilim's legacy continued through certain human bloodlines. The mystery of the Nephilim has fascinated people for centuries. Their story is brief in the Bible, yet its implications are profound. Were they the result of an unholy union between heaven and earth? Were they symbols of mankind's rebellion against God? Or were they simply powerful men whose reputations grew into legend over time? As we continue exploring the story of the Nephilim, we will examine their fate during the Great Flood. If God sought to cleanse the world of their presence, why do later scriptures suggest that giants still walked the earth long after the waters receded? The Great Flood. Did God try to erase the Nephilim? The story of the Great Flood is one of the most dramatic and significant events in biblical history. According to Genesis, the world had become so corrupt and filled with violence that God decided to bring judgment upon it. Genesis 6 verse 5 states, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." This verse describes a world consumed by sin, a place where morality had collapsed and humanity had turned away from God. But was this corruption primarily caused by human wickedness, or did the Nephilim play a role in the world's downfall? Genesis 6 verse 11 to 13 provides further insight into the state of the earth before the flood. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, "I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth." Many scholars believe that the mention of the Nephilim in Genesis 6 verse 4 suggests that they were part of this corruption. If the Nephilim were indeed the offspring of fallen angels and human women, their existence could have represented a distortion of God's creation. According to this interpretation, the Great Flood was not just a response to general human sin, but also an effort to cleanse the world of these unnatural beings. The book of Enoch expands on this idea, describing how the Nephilim brought chaos to the earth. According to Enoch 7 verse 226, the Nephilim were giants who devoured everything in sight, even turning to cannibalism when food ran out. Their violent and lawless behavior was a major factor in God's decision to send the flood. This aligns with Genesis 6 verse 13, where God specifically mentions that the earth was filled with violence. However, despite the flood's destructive power, later biblical passages suggest that giants still existed after the waters receded. In Numbers 13 verse 33, when the Israelite spies explore Canaan, they report seeing the descendants of the Nephilim. "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This raises a major question. If the flood was meant to wipe out all living creatures except those on the ark, How could the Nephilim have survived? There are several possible explanations. One theory is that fallen angels may have repeated their actions after the flood, once again producing offspring with human women. This would explain why certain groups, such as the Anakim and the Rephaim, were described as giants in later biblical accounts. Another possibility is that the term Nephilim was used more broadly to describe powerful and fearsome warriors, rather than referring to a specific bloodline. In this case, the giants mentioned after the flood may not have been direct descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim, but rather later groups of mighty warriors who were given the same name. A third interpretation suggests that the Nephilim's lineage may have somehow survived through Noah's family. Genesis 6 verse 9 describes Noah as a righteous man, blameless in his generation, which some interpret as a statement about his pure ancestry. However, his sons' wives are not described in the same way. Some speculate that a genetic connection to the Nephilim could have been carried through one of the wives, allowing their lineage to persist after the flood. Regardless of which explanation is correct, the presence of giants in the post-flood world indicates that the Great Flood did not completely erase the memory or influence of the Nephilim. Instead, their legacy continued, appearing in later biblical narratives and influencing the struggles of Israel as they entered the Promised Land. The Great Flood was a divine reset, a way for God to cleanse the earth and start anew. Yet, the appearance of giants in later scriptures suggests that the forces of corruption were not entirely eliminated. This brings us to the question of who these later giants were. Were they truly Nephilim, or were they a different kind of people altogether? To answer this, we must examine the various giant clans mentioned in the Bible, including the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the famous warrior Goliath. The giants after the flood, the Anakim, Rephaim, and Goliath. If the Great Flood was meant to purge the earth of corruption, including the Nephilim, why do we find accounts of giants appearing long after the waters receded? The Bible provides multiple references to groups of giants in the land of Canaan and beyond, described as fearsome warriors and powerful adversaries of the Israelites. Among these were the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the Emim, mysterious peoples whose origins have long been debated. One of the most striking mentions of giants comes from the book of Numbers when the Israelites, led by Moses, send spies to scout the Promised Land. In Numbers 13 verse 32 to 33, the spies return with a fearful report. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim, they're the descendants of Enoch, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." This passage explicitly connects the Nephilim to the Anakim, a race of giants dwelling in Canaan. But if the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood, how could their descendants still exist? There are several possible explanations. One interpretation is that the fallen angels repeated their actions after the flood, once again taking human wives and producing a new generation of giants. Another theory is that some remnant of the Nephilim survived the flood, possibly through Noah's family or another means unknown to us. A third possibility is that the term Nephilim was used in a more general sense to describe any group of particularly large or powerful people, rather than denoting a direct bloodline from the pre- to flood Nephilim. Regardless of their precise origins, the Anakim were formidable opponents. They are mentioned multiple times in the Old Testament, particularly in relation to the conquest of Canaan. Deuteronomy 9 verse 1 to 2 describes them in inspiring terms. "Hear, O Israel, you are now about to cross the Jordan, to go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. The people are strong and tall, Anakites. You know about them and have heard it said, 'Who can stand up against the Anakites?' Despite their fearsome reputation, The Anakim were eventually driven out by Joshua and the Israelite armies. Joshua 11 verse 21 to 22 records their defeat. At that time, Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. This final note is particularly significant because it mentions Gath, a city that would later produce one of the most famous giants in history, Goliath. Another group of giants mentioned in the Bible is the Rephaim. The name Rephaim is sometimes used to refer to both a race of giants and the spirits of the dead, adding another layer of mystery to their identity. Deuteronomy 2 verse 10 to 11 describes them as follows. The Emim used to live there, a people great and numerous, and as tall as the Anakim. They too were considered Rephaim, like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. This passage indicates that the Emim, a giant race that once lived in Moab, were considered part of the broader Rephaim group, much like the Anakim. The Rephaim were also associated with King Og of Bashan, one of the last recorded giants in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 3 verse 11 gives a remarkable detail about Og. For only Og king of Bashan was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. His bed was made of iron and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. It is still in Rabbah of the Ammonites. A cubit is roughly 18 inches, meaning Og's bed was about 13.5 feet long. This suggests that he was of extraordinary height, supporting the idea that the Rephaim were indeed giants. Perhaps the most famous giant of all is Goliath, the Philistine warrior defeated by David. Goliath's story is found in 1 Samuel 17, where he is described as a towering adversary who defied the armies of Israel. 1 Samuel 17 verse 4 to 7 provides details about his size and armor. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. If Goliath was 6 cubits and a span tall, he would have stood at approximately 9 feet 9 inches, an enormous height by any standard. Interestingly, Goliath was not the only giant among the Philistines. 2 Samuel 21 verse 15 to 22 mentions other giants who were defeated by David's men, including a warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. These giants were described as being descendants of Rapha, again linking them to the Rephaim. The presence of giants in the post-flood world remains a mystery. Whether they were directly descended from the pre-flood Nephilim, a new race of giants with a different origin, or simply exceptionally large and powerful men, they played a significant role in biblical history. They were often seen as obstacles to God's people, enemies who needed to be overcome through faith and divine intervention. The Book of Enoch and other ancient writings. What was left out of the Bible? The Book of Enoch provides a much more detailed account of the Nephilim than the Bible, identifying the sons of God in Genesis 6 as fallen angels called the Watchers. According to this text, a group of 200 angels, led by Simjaza, descended to earth, took human wives, and taught forbidden knowledge, including weapon-making, sorcery, and astrology. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were described as giants who became violent, consuming all available resources before turning on humanity itself. 1 Enoch 7 verse 2 to 5 states that they even began to devour each other and drink blood, an act that deeply offended God. Because of this corruption, God sent the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael to intervene. 1 Enoch 10 verse 9 to 12 describes how they were commanded to destroy the Nephilim in battle, bind the fallen angels in the depths of the earth, and purify the world through the great flood. This explanation aligns with Genesis, but adds further detail, presenting the flood as a direct response to the Watchers' rebellion. The Book of Jubilees, another ancient Jewish text, echoes this story. It describes the Watchers' descent, their sin, and their offspring, who became lawless and brought destruction upon the earth. Like Enoch, Jubilees presents the flood as God's way of cleansing the world of these beings. Fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls also reference the Nephilim, particularly in a text known as the Book of Giants. This document expands on their story, describing how some of the Nephilim had dreams foretelling their impending doom. They sought out Enoch for answers, but divine judgment was already set against them. Though these writings are not part of the biblical canon, they provide insight into how early Jewish communities understood the Nephilim. Their stories emphasize the idea that these beings were not just symbols of human wickedness, but the result of a cosmic rebellion, one that required divine intervention to restore order. But do these ancient accounts have any relevance beyond biblical history? Some believe they may hold clues about the future. The Nephilim and the end times, do they still matter today? The story of the Nephilim is often thought of as an ancient mystery, a strange passage in Genesis that describes a time before the flood when the world was filled with corruption and supernatural beings. However, some believe that the presence of the Nephilim may not have been limited to the distant past. Could they have a role in the future? Could Jesus have been referring to them when he spoke of the days of Noah? And if so, does this mean that Nephilim-like beings could return as part of the unfolding events of the last days? One of the key verses used in discussions about the Nephilim and the end times is found in Matthew 24 verse 37 to 39, where Jesus describes what the world will be like before his return. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. At first glance, this passage seems to be speaking about how people will be caught off guard by the end times, just as they were before the flood. But some scholars believe that the days of Noah refers to more than just moral decay and human ignorance. It may hint at the supernatural events that took place before the flood, including the presence of the Nephilim. If these beings were on earth before God's judgment in Noah's time, could similar beings exist before the final judgment at the return of Christ? There is speculation that fallen angels who fathered the Nephilim in the past may one day return, continuing their rebellion against God. Support for this idea comes from Jude 1 verse 6, which describes how certain angels were bound in chains for their past sins. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. This verse is often linked to 2 Peter 2 verse 4, which states, "For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment." If these fallen angels were imprisoned specifically for corrupting humanity, some believe that they may be released in the end times as part of God's final judgment. The book of Revelation describes a time when supernatural beings will emerge, bringing chaos to the world. In Revelation 9 verse 1 to 11, a terrifying vision unfolds as a bottomless pit is opened, releasing strange creatures described as part human, part beast. Some interpret these beings as demonic entities, possibly even connected to the fallen angels of Genesis 6. Another interpretation suggests that the Nephilim may return not as physical giants, but through a new form of genetic corruption. Just as the fallen angels in the days of Noah tampered with humanity, leading to the birth of the Nephilim, could there be another attempt to alter God's creation? Advances in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and transhumanism have led some to speculate whether humanity itself could be changed in a way that mirrors the corruption of Noah's time. The idea that mankind could be enhanced or merged with something beyond human nature raises ethical and spiritual questions that echo the warnings found in ancient texts. There is also the question of whether the Nephilim were purely physical beings or if they left a spiritual legacy that still influences the world today. The Bible frequently describes the struggle between God's people and giants such as the Anakim and Rephaim, but these battles may also symbolize a deeper war, one between divine order and the forces of chaos. The Nephilim, whether as literal beings or as a representation of evil, are linked to the idea of rebellion against God. In the end times, the Bible warns of increased deception, false miracles, and signs meant to lead people astray. Could this deception include a return of the influence of the Nephilim, whether through supernatural beings, advanced technology, or a renewed corruption of humanity? Regardless of how one interprets these passages, the connection between the Nephilim and the end times continues to be a topic of great interest. While the Bible does not explicitly state that the Nephilim will return, the reference to the days of Noah invites speculation about whether history could repeat itself. If their presence before the flood was a sign of divine judgment, then their potential return, whether literal or symbolic, may serve as a warning that the world is once again approaching a critical moment in history. The story of the Nephilim is one of the most mysterious and debated topics in the Bible. From their first mention in Genesis 6 to their possible presence in the post-flood world and their potential connection to end-times prophecy, these beings continue to intrigue scholars, theologians, and believers alike. Whether they were fallen angels' offspring, mighty rulers, or symbols of extreme human wickedness, their role in biblical history remains significant. The Great Flood was seen as God's way of purging the earth of corruption, yet giants like the Anakim, Rephaim, and Goliath appeared long after. The Book of Enoch and other ancient writings provide additional insight, portraying the Nephilim as destructive forces that were judged and wiped out. However, their legacy persists in biblical references and theological discussions, with some believing that their influence may resurface before the final judgment. The words of Jesus about the days of Noah continue to raise questions about whether the conditions of the pre-flood world, including supernatural events, will reappear in the last days. Whether the Nephilim themselves will return, or whether their story serves as a broader warning about deception, corruption, and rebellion, remains uncertain. What is clear is that their presence in Scripture, no matter how brief, carries deep theological implications. While the full truth about the Nephilim may never be known, their story serves as a powerful reminder of the spiritual battle that has existed since the beginning of time. Their mysterious past may hold keys to understanding not just the history of humanity, but also the warnings about what is yet to come. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep biblical discussions. Like the video to support the content, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the Nephilim, and share this video with your friends and family so they can join the conversation. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.